Let's set aside the familiar images of war for a moment. Forget the mighty tank columns, the fighter jets roaring as they tear across the sky, or the colossal multi-billion-dollar warships. The story we're about to tell doesn't start in a state-of-the-art Pentagon arms factory. Instead, it was likely born in a small workshop in Kyiv, amidst electronic components bought online, and an idea so audacious it bordered on insane. This is the story of a $500 revolution, one that took place at 8:30 a.m. on the 19th of May 2025, a moment that has forever etched its name into the annals of modern warfare. It stands as a powerful testament to how in the digital age, human ingenuity, creativity, and courage can transform what seems like a cheap tech toy into a weapon of astonishing destructive power, capable of bringing down a steel fortress an enemy once boasted was impregnable. It all began in a secret, well-camouflaged bunker somewhere along the southern coast of Ukraine. Inside, an agent from the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, wearing a specialized headset and gripping a drone controller, held his breath. The air was thick with tension. Then the order was given, short and decisive. Just seconds later, a small object lifted off from the coastal reeds. It was a quadcopter drone, no larger than a dinner plate, and the total cost to assemble it was less than $500. It rose gently, skimmed over the water, and began its 35-kilometer journey straight out into the Black Sea. Its target was not a lone tank or a group of soldiers. This target was far more valuable, strategic, and symbolic. It was the eyes of the Russian bear on the sea. Its name was the Boyko Tower. Originally, it was just an ordinary civilian gas drilling platform. But since the conflict began, the Russian military had transformed it into a fortified military outpost, a steel fortress looming over the open sea. It wasn't just an observation post. It had become one of Moscow's most critical surveillance, intelligence, and command centers in the northwestern Black Sea. Standing nearly 40 meters above the water, bristling with an array of radar antennas and electronic warfare equipment, and garrisoned by dozens of Russian military personnel, the Boyko Tower had become a symbol of Russia's reach and control, extending far beyond the Crimean Peninsula. But the Ukrainians had a plan that didn't rely on NATO cruise missiles or expensive jet squadrons. Their plan was built on the centimeter-level precision of first-person view FPV drones, homemade explosive charges, and the steel nerves of a single pilot. What was about to unfold was not just a drone strike. It was a masterclass in ingenuity, adaptability, and the true nature of asymmetric warfare. The goal wasn't just to destroy a radar dish. The goal was to send an unmistakable message. The Black Sea was no longer a safe playground for Moscow's ambitions. And in just a few short minutes, the sky above the sea and the steel fortress below would witness something the Kremlin never saw coming, a revolution that started with just $500. The core of this audacious plan lay not in the destructive power of the explosive, but in the near-absolute precision of its delivery vehicle. And that precision depended entirely on one person, a pilot with the call sign Soil, sitting motionless in the camouflaged coastal bunker. Soil gently pulled on his FPV goggles. Instantly, the real world around him dissolved. He no longer saw the cold concrete walls, the flickering computer monitors, or his teammates holding their breath beside him. Instead, he was seeing the world through another set of eyes, the eyes of the very drone he and his team had carefully assembled just days before. It was a surreal experience, a fusion of mind and machine, a symbiosis of man and technology in its purest form. The drone Soil was piloting a 10-inch frame quadcopter, looked like nothing more than a homemade product, assembled in a small Kyiv workshop from Chinese-made electronic parts. Outwardly, it was identical to the drones tech enthusiasts use for racing or cinematography. But this was no longer a harmless toy. Strapped with plastic zip ties beneath its frame was a handcrafted explosive charge. It contained nearly 3.2 kilograms of high-grade C4 plastic explosive meticulously calculated by engineers to create a focused, directional blast, maximizing its destructive force at a single point on impact. What turned this drone into a lethal weapon wasn't just the explosive it carried, but the entire design philosophy behind it. With a compact frame and crucially no reliance on a GPS navigation system, it could fly extremely low, less than 50 meters above the sea, and travel at high speed. More importantly, it flew in an erratic, zigzagging pattern to evade detection by air defense radar systems. The video signal it transmitted was analog, not digital. This might sound outdated, but it was a massive strategic advantage. The analog signal has almost zero latency, allowing Soil to control it with instantaneous centimeter-precise reflexes as if he were actually sitting in its cockpit. It was also harder to jam than a digital signal. Furthermore, with a radar cross-section no bigger than a seabird's, it was practically invisible to Russia's cumbersome air defense systems, which were designed to detect aircraft missiles or much larger drones. It was an iron mosquito flying silently below the radar's gaze, emitting no electronic signals, no significant heat signature, only the quiet whine of 4 brushless motors spinning at 20 revolutions per minute. As it took off, it blended into the humid Black Sea air and began its 35-kilometer journey, skimming the waves invisible to radar, its sound drowned out by the howling wind. Through his headset, Soil could hear only the wind and the beat of his own heart. Through his FPV goggles, he saw the sea glittering in the early morning sun, a light mist, and in the distance a tiny black speck on the horizon. That speck was growing larger and larger. It was the Boyko Tower. And in less than 15 minutes, the world would learn what a $500 drone in the hands of a skilled pilot could do to one of Russia's most critical military eyes on the sea. To understand the significance of this attack, we need to look closer at the target. The Boyko Tower was no mere derelict rig. Through Soil's FPV lens, it appeared clear, sharp, and menacing. Looming over the waves, it was a true fortress. The Russian military had spared no effort in converting a civilian structure into a multifunctional military hub. Steel walkways connected living quarters, storage depots, communication centers, and fuel tanks, all perched precariously on a system of reinforced concrete support pillars. It wasn't just a watch post. It was a complete forward operating base with enough supplies, power, and defensive positions for long-term operations. But the crown jewel, the very heart of this fortress, was bolted to the tower's highest point. It was the Naval radar system. This was no Cold War relic. It was one of the few Soviet-era surveillance systems that remained incredibly effective. The Naval radar operated on the K-band at a frequency of 35 GHz using a rotating antenna array that scanned the sky and sea every few seconds. It could detect both aircraft and naval vessels within a radius of up to 45 kilometers, giving Russian forces a never-sleeping eye that covered a vast area of the northwestern Black Sea. What made it especially dangerous was its information processing capability. The Neva could track up to 200 different targets simultaneously, feeding real-time data to Russian command centers and forward weapon systems. If a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone or fast attack craft entered the area, Neva saw it instantly, and minutes later, Russian missiles would be on their way. That is why it had to be destroyed. For months, Ukrainian naval operations had been crippled by the Neva's reach. Every attempt to move unmanned surface vessels or even reconnaissance drones through this corridor was met with interception or electronic jamming. The Neva wasn't just watching, it was actively denying Ukraine access to its own waters. And it wasn't just about sight. With the Neva intact, the Boyko Tower acted as a coordination hub, linking radar tracking with communication systems, air defenses, and long-range weapons deployed along the Crimean coast. It was the brain and eyes of Russia's defensive network in the region. Destroying it would not only blind the Russians, but also deafen them and disrupt their chain of command. However, no radar system, no matter how advanced, was designed to withstand a direct impact from a precision-guided FPV drone carrying a powerful explosive charge. As the steel fortress grew larger in Soil's view, he knew exactly where to aim. Not for the flimsy antenna array, but for its rotating base, the mechanical heart of the entire system. One shot, one impact. That's all it would take to blind the giant. Time seemed to slow down. The drone, now less than 50 meters above the sea, continued its deadly dance, weaving along a pre-planned trajectory, low, erratic, and invisible to the very system it was about to destroy. Every turn, every adjustment was made by hand. This wasn't artificial intelligence. This was Soil's eyes, hands, and heartbeat guiding every movement. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his hands remained steady on the controls. He knew that a single small mistake, a sudden gust of wind, or a moment of lost focus could mean failure for the entire mission. When he was about 800 meters from the target, he began his final approach. Through the video feed, he could make out the faint shapes of Russian personnel, tiny figures on the lower decks, working completely unaware of the scythe of death, hurtling toward them from the horizon. The Neva's antenna continued its slow, methodical rotation, its machinery scanning for threats it could never see. The drone had the signature of a large seabird, barely a blip on a radar screen if that. No heat signature, no electronic emissions, just 4 motors screaming at 20 revolutions per minute, a homemade bomb strapped underneath, and a pilot who knew exactly where to strike. At 200 meters soil locked on. The sweet spot, the rotating joint between the radar antenna and its control system. A hit there, and the entire system would collapse both mechanically and electronically. At over 60 kilometers per hour, the drone shot forward like an arrow. In the final moments, a Russian soldier seemed to spot it. He pointed at the sky too late. Another reached for his rifle, but the drone was only seconds away. 9:20 a.m. The quadcopter slammed into the Neva's rotating base. The explosion was instantaneous. It wasn't massive, no giant fireball, but it didn't need to be. It was focused, precise, and brutally effective. The protective aluminum housing was vaporized. The internal waveguides were shredded. The signal emitters were completely destroyed. The mechanical and electronic heart of the surveillance system was gone. A multi-million-dollar system, a symbol of Russian control, had been reduced to twisted metal by a drone that cost less than a year's subscription to Netflix. As a plume of black smoke billowed from the top of the tower's soil, let out a breath. One target down. And Ukraine's war on the Black Sea had only just begun. As black smoke still billowed from the wreckage of the Neva radar, the Russian soldiers on the Boyko Tower were in a state of panic, trying to comprehend what had just happened. An explosion out of nowhere. There had been no sound of aircraft, no missile warning. Before they could regain their composure and report to headquarters, Ukraine initiated Phase 2 of the plan. This time, the objective wasn't to cripple the sensors. The objective was to completely obliterate the fortress. About 50 kilometers from the coast and hurtling forward at a terrifying speed, a sleek gray object was cutting through the waves. It was not a conventional boat. It was not a torpedo. It was the Sea Baby, a 6-meter-long unmanned surface vessel, USV, purpose-built by the SBU for a single-mission structural annihilation. If the FPV drone was a surgical assassin relying on human reflexes and homemade explosives, the Sea Baby was a monster, engineered from the ground up for maritime warfare. It was the embodiment of Ukraine's industrial and military technical prowess, an answer to the invaders. Beneath its narrow hull was a warhead, packed with nearly 1,000 kilograms of high-grade military explosive. This warhead was not just designed to create a massive blast. It was equipped with shaped charges arranged around the bow to create a cascading, resonant, explosive effect. It didn't just detonate, it pierced and annihilated everything it touched, powerful enough to shatter reinforced concrete and melt steel. A pair of 2,000 horsepower waterjet engines propelled it at 49 knots, about 90 kilometers per hour, while maintaining an extremely low profile on the water to evade radar. Guided by a GPS inertial navigation system and a high-definition camera, the Sea Baby moved with machine-like precision, capable of making micro-adjustments right up to the point of impact. And unlike the FPV drone, the Sea Baby didn't need to improvise. Its target was fixed. Its approach vector was planned to the second. And now, with the Neva radar blinded, the Boyko Tower was completely deaf to threats coming from the sea. Over encrypted satellite links, SBU operators watched their steel assassin closing in, deadly and unstoppable. The Russians on the tower saw only the smoke from the first explosion. They had no idea what was coming next. The Sea Baby wasn't coming to break a radar dish, it was coming to level a fortress. The Boyko Tower, once a gas rig, had been transformed by the Russian military into a multi-level military installation. Steel walkways, living quarters, storage depots, communication hubs, and fuel tanks were all built upon a network of sturdy support pillars. It wasn't just a sentry post. It was a forward base designed for long-term survival at sea. But every fortress, no matter how strong, has a weak point. And Ukraine's engineers had found it. Through intelligence sources and engineering analysis, they had identified the tower's Achilles heel, the main load-bearing structural joint between the platform and the housing block, the single connection point bearing the entire weight of the rig's upper levels. In theory, if that single joint could be destroyed, the rest of the tower would collapse like a house of cards. The Sea Baby's mission wasn't to disable but to annihilate. When it was about 45 kilometers out, the vessel's high-definition camera locked onto the target. The operators on land watched frame by frame, seeing the steel fortress grow larger on their screens. The Russian soldiers were now moving about, still stunned from the FPV attack. completely unaware they were standing on a massive ticking time bomb. Unlike a missile or an airstrike, the Sea Baby offered no warning. No radar signature, no supersonic boom, just a gray shadow skimming the waves hidden in the glare of the morning Sunday. The approach was calculated with surgical precision, the targeting data absolute. The objective to ram the load-bearing joint at full speed, with 1,000 kilograms of explosives, turning an architectural vulnerability into a catastrophic collapse. This was not an act of harassment. This was an act of erasure. The Boyko Tower wasn't just about to be disconnected. It was about to disappear from the map. And the Sea Baby was seconds away from executing its final judgment. 9:50 a.m. The Sea Baby impacts. Moving at nearly 90 kilometers per hour, the multi-ton unmanned vessel slammed into the precise structural joint between the rig and the living quarters of the Boyko Tower. The impact triggered a shaped charge explosion designed for maximum destruction. The result was nothing short of apocalyptic. In a millisecond, the central support beams were liquefied by temperatures exceeding 3500 degrees Celsius. Steel-twisted concrete vaporized. The housing block, where dozens of Russian personnel were stationed, vanished in a fireball that consumed the sky. And then, like a dying beast, the rest of the platform began to collapse. But that was only the beginning. The explosion triggered a chain reaction. The diesel fuel tanks ruptured and detonated with horrific force. Ammunition stores, communications equipment, and fuel depots exploded one after another, sending secondary fireballs tearing through the structure. In an instant, the entire tower was a colossal torch. A column of black smoke rose over 1,000 meters into the air, visible from satellites, foreign naval vessels, and the world. The sea below the wreckage boiled. In less than 5 minutes, what was once a multi-level forward base was now a floating cemetery. The upper decks collapsed into the sea. Supplies, weapons, and twisted pieces of steel rained down like burning shrapnel. The few Russian soldiers who survived the initial blast were trapped on debris, too unstable to stand on, in air too toxic to breathe, and in a situation too dangerous for rescue. Their radios were silent. Their radar was gone. And their last hope had just sunk into the Black Sea. As the last flames flickered out on the ruins of the Boyko Tower, an undeniable truth emerged. The rules of war had changed forever. What Ukraine accomplished on May 19th was not just a tactical victory. It was a strategic, era-defining statement. In the span of 80 minutes, for a total cost of less than $10,000, Ukraine had eliminated one of Russia's most fortified and expensive surveillance outposts in the Black Sea. No fighter jets, no cruise missiles, no billion-dollar defense contracts. Just a racing drone strapped with a homemade bomb and a 6-meter unmanned boat designed for destruction. This isn't science fiction. This is ingenuity. This is asymmetric warfare in its purest form. The world watched as Ukraine demonstrated what happens when creativity outmaneuvers convention. A drone built from off-the-shelf parts and guided by a pair of FPV goggles had neutralized a radar system designed to control an entire region. And a sleek, unmanned boat powered by speed and precision had taken down a steel giant that was supposed to stand for decades. This operation shattered the assumption that only superpowers with massive defense budgets could conduct precision strikes. It proved that expensive surveillance systems are not invincible, and that the Black Sea is no longer Moscow's private lake. With 2 drones and a meticulously coordinated plan, Ukraine had turned a symbol of Russian strength into a symbol of Russian vulnerability. More than that, it provided a blueprint for the future of warfare: cheap, fast, smart, and, when necessary, brutally effective. It showed that smaller nations with limited resources can still challenge larger military powers by leveraging civilian technology and unconventional tactical thinking. The fight is no longer just about the number of tanks or warships. It's also a battle of innovation, of adaptability, and of finding an opponent's most unexpected weaknesses. This story isn't just about Snake Island or the Boyko Tower. It's about the Black Sea and who will control it. Because the next time a radar lights up or a steel fortress is erected, someone is bound to ask the question that now haunts military planners from Kaliningrad to Sevastopol: can it survive a $500 drone? And that is a question no superpower can confidently answer anymore.